Go to your dad, he'll take care of you. I am tired.
The day Grace left, her 6-year-old daughter ran after the car until her little legs gave out. She screamed her mother's name until her voice broke. She fell on the dusty road, sobbing so hard she could not breathe. And Grace, her own mother, never once looked in the rear-view mirror. Not once. If you want to know how that little girl grew up to become the most feared attorney in the country, and what happened the day her mother showed up at her gate with nothing but regret and an empty hand, stay right here. Because this story does not just have a twist. It has a reckoning. And by the time it is over, you will understand exactly why some prices cannot be paid in installments. Kofi and Grace did not start as a broken story. They started as the kind of love story that small towns never forget. Childhood sweethearts who grew up on the same street, chased each other through the same dusty roads, fell in love before they even had the vocabulary for what they were feeling. When Kofi married Grace at 23, he had nothing but a blacksmith's workshop at the edge of town, a burning desire to build something real, and a wife who looked him in the eye on their wedding day and said, "We will do this together." And for a while, they did. The workshop was nothing to look at, a low iron shed, the constant ring of metal on metal, the heat of the forge pressing against everything, the smell of burning coal that clung to Kofi's skin even after he bathed. But every gate he welded, every railing he bent into shape, every hinge and bolt and bracket, he made with the care of a man who understood that his hands were his children's future. Grace would bring him lunch wrapped in cloth, sit beside him on an upturned bucket, and they would talk. The house they would build. The children they would raise. The life that was coming if they held on long enough. They had 4 children. Kwame came first, serious, watchful, already carrying an invisible weight on his small shoulders that no one had put there but that he seemed to have chosen himself. Then Abina, gentle, perceptive, the kind of child who noticed things adults hoped nobody noticed. Then Yo, the joyful one, the one who could find something worth laughing about even when the rice was burnt and the kerosene was low. And finally Alma, fierce from the moment she arrived, with her father's eyes and a will that seemed to have been forged in the same fire as his ironwork. Life was modest but it was whole. The children ate. They went to school in clean uniforms. Kofi worked from before sunrise until after dark and Grace managed the home, sold vegetables at the market on weekends, and kept the household moving forward. There was laughter in that small house. There was enough. But enough has a quiet enemy. And its name is comparison. It crept in so slowly that nobody saw it coming. Grace would go to the market and return with something sitting behind her eyes that had not been there when she left. She started watching other women who used to sit beside her in secondary school, who used to share her lunch, who used to know the same struggle she knew, arriving in cars with tinted windows, wearing lace that cost more than a month of Kofi's earnings. Gold at their throats. Designer bags swinging from their wrists. Shopping without checking prices, without the tight chest that Grace carried every single day like a stone she could not put down. She would look at her faded wrapper. Her worn slippers. The small pile of tomatoes that represented an entire morning's work. And something in her would shift, not dramatically, not all at once, but the way a foundation cracks. Quietly. Deep underneath. Where nobody can see it until it is already too late. She said nothing at first. She was a good wife. She knew how to swallow things. But the swallowing was changing her from the inside, and Kofi felt it before he understood it, in the silences that stretched longer than they used to, in the way she answered him in monosyllables where she once answered in whole stories, in the distance that was opening between them in their own bed like a slow tide going out. Then one evening the silence broke. Kofi. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the sound of him working on a repair in the yard. Our mates are living proper lives. Look at Mensima. Look at Adwoa. They have cars now. Their husbands built them houses. And we are still here, in the same place, doing the same thing, eating the same food we ate 5 years ago. When does it change? Kofi set his tools down. He looked at his wife with the careful eyes of a man who could see a storm but did not yet know how bad it would get. Grace, we are making progress. Business will improve. Just have patience, my love. Patience. She said the word like it had personally offended her. I have been patient for 10 years. I am not asking for a palace. I am asking for a life that does not feel like we are always just barely surviving. The children were at the dinner table. Kwame stared at his plate. Abina quietly reached for Alma's hand under the table. Yo chewed his food in silence, his eyes moving carefully between his parents. Kofi said nothing more. He picked up his tools and went back to work because what else could he do? He was already giving everything he had. He just did not know yet that the woman sitting in his house had already begun, in the quietest corner of her heart, to look for a door. Now here is where the story changes. Because Grace was not simply greedy. That would be too simple. Grace was a woman who had buried a particular dream so many times she had forgotten she was still mourning it. She had wanted things, not just money, but the feeling that her life mattered, that she was seen, that she was worth something beyond what she could carry on her head to market. Those are not ugly desires. They are deeply human ones. The tragedy of Grace was not that she wanted more. It was that she chose the wrong door when she went looking for it. And Serwa opened that door wide. Serwa had been in Grace's secondary school class. Same bench, same teacher, same tattered textbooks. But somewhere between then and now, Serwa had made different choices, or found different men, which in certain circles amounts to the same thing. She stepped out of her black car in the market that afternoon wearing a red lace outfit with gold embroidery, designer sunglasses catching the sun, heels clicking against the ground with the particular confidence of a woman who had decided long ago that she would never stand behind a vegetable stall again. She looked at Grace. She took in the faded wrapper, the worn slippers, and the basket of tomatoes. And she smiled the smile of a woman who knows exactly what she is doing. Grace, she said, removing her sunglasses slowly. Is this really you? Selling vegetables? You were one of the most beautiful girls in our whole class. Grace felt the shame like heat on her skin. She swallowed it. You know how life is, my sister. We are just managing. Serwa shook her head slowly. Managing. She repeated the word with practiced sympathy, the kind that is really just a mirror being held up. A woman like you should not be managing. You should be living. She reached into her bag and produced a card. Come to a party with me on Saturday. Big men will be there. The kind of men who look at a woman and actually see her. She pressed the card into Grace's palm and held it there for a moment. You deserve to be seen, Grace. Don't you think so? Grace looked down at the card. She knew. Every woman in that town knew exactly what Serwa's parties were and exactly what women like Serwa exchanged for their cars and their gold. She knew it the way you know something that your conscience is shouting about while something else in you is already making plans. She put the card in her pocket. She told herself it was just curiosity. Just one evening. Just to see how the other half live. She told herself she was not the kind of woman who would actually do anything. She told Kofi she was visiting an old friend, and Kofi, who had never once in 10 years had a reason to doubt her, kissed her forehead and told her not to stay out too late. He bathed the children, helped Amma with her reading, tucked them all in, and sat in the chair by the door to wait. Grace did not come home until 3 in the morning. She walked in smelling of a perfume that did not belong to their home, a new bag on her arm, her hair styled differently. Kofi stood up from the chair where he had been sitting awake for hours, and the look on his face, not accusatory, just pained, the face of a man watching water slip between his fingers, should have undone her entirely. It did not. "Where have you been?" he asked quietly. "Visiting my friend. I told you." She walked past him without meeting his eyes. Little Alma had woken from the noise and padded out in her nightclothes, eyes still half closed. She reached up for her mother with both arms. "Mama. Where did you go?" Grace stepped around the child without touching her. "Go back to bed." Not a hug. Not a look. Just a body navigating around an obstacle. Kofi lifted his 6-year-old daughter, held her against his chest, and carried her back to bed. As he tucked her in, Alma looked up at him with eyes that were too awake for the hour. "Papa, is Mama okay?" "Mama is fine," he said. "Sleep now, my dear." But something had changed in that house that night. Something small but structural. The way a single bolt coming loose can eventually bring down an entire gate. What happened next happened the way all slow destructions happen, gradually, then suddenly. Grace began going out more often. Serwa became a constant presence, calling, visiting, always with somewhere to be and someone to meet and something that sparkled waiting on the other side. Chief Mensa, wealthy, smooth, practiced in the particular art of making women feel chosen, became more than an evening's encounter. He gave Grace an allowance. Then a car. Then an apartment in the city that she visited on weekends and told Kofi was her friend's place. And Serwa, always Serwa, whispering in her ear. "Why are you still going back to that house? You have your own car now. You have money. Chief Mensa wants to make this permanent. What exactly are you holding on to, Grace? What is left for you there?" Grace would go quiet when Serwa said these things. And the silence was not the silence of a woman who disagreed. It was the silence of a woman who was running out of reasons to argue. Because here is what Grace never said out loud, not even to herself in those moments of quiet honesty that come at 2 in the morning when a person cannot sleep. She felt guilty. She felt it in the way she sometimes stood in the doorway of her children's room and watched them sleeping and felt something tear in her chest that she immediately walked away from because she could not afford to feel it and still do what she was doing. She felt it every time little Alma ran to her and she found reasons not to hold on too long. She felt it when Kofi looked at her across the dinner table with eyes that were still full of a love she no longer felt she deserved and she had to look away. But guilt is not the same as stopping. And Grace had convinced herself, in the way that people convince themselves of the things they need to believe, that her children would be fine. That Kofi would find someone better. That she was not really abandoning anyone, she was simply choosing herself. That she deserved this. That she had earned it somehow, through all those years of managing and waiting and watching other women live. She was still telling herself that, on the Saturday afternoon she drove up to the house in Chief Mensa's brand new car, wearing gold lace that blazed in the afternoon sun, to tell her family she was leaving. The neighbors came out to watch. They always did. Grace stepped out of the car with her sunglasses on and her chin up and called Kofi's name with the flat, decided voice of a woman who had rehearsed this moment and was determined to get through it before the guilt could catch up with her. "I am leaving," she announced, loudly enough for the whole street to hear. "I have found someone who can give me the life I deserve. I am done with this." The word she did not say was poverty. But everyone heard it anyway. Kofi came toward her slowly, his hands marked with his work, and the look on his face broke something in the watching neighbors even if it did not break anything in Grace. "Grace," he said. "Please. Think about what you are doing. Think about the children. We have been together for 10 years. 10 years of the same small life, she said. I am done. The children came running out. Kwame stood frozen in the doorway. Abina covered her mouth. Yo grabbed his mother's arm with both hands. Mama, please, don't, please, and she shook him off and turned toward the car. And that was when Amma came flying out of the house. 6 years old. Bare feet on hot dust. Screaming her mother's name with every cell in her small body. She ran after the car as it pulled away. She ran and screamed and ran until her knees hit the ground and her palms tore open on the gravel and her voice shredded itself into nothing, but she kept screaming anyway because she was 6 years old and she did not yet know that some people leave and do not come back. Grace's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Her jaw clenched. She pressed the accelerator. She did not look back. Kofi reached his daughter and gathered her up, this bleeding, heaving, devastated child, and held her against his chest so tightly that she could feel his heartbeat. She clung to him and wept. The other children pressed close. The neighbors stood in silence now, the entertainment of the moment curdling into something that felt uncomfortably like witnessing. Kofi stood in the dust with his 4 children surrounding him and he felt the full, terrible weight of what had just happened move through him like a wave. He let it. He stood there and felt all of it, the humiliation, the grief, the bewilderment, the particular devastation of loving someone who chose to leave. He felt it completely. And then he made the quietest, most consequential decision of his life. He could not fall apart. There were 4 children watching him, and he was all they had, and he absolutely could not fall apart. So he did not. What followed tested Kofi in ways he had not known he could be tested. The mockery from the neighborhood was relentless in the way that only small-town mockery can be, intimate, daily, inescapable. Men he had known for years suddenly had things to say as he passed. Women who had never paid him any particular attention now discussed him over their cooking fires. That is the man whose wife ran to Chief Mensa. He must have done something wrong. A real man keeps his wife. He walked through it every day with his jaw set because he refused, absolutely refused, to let his children see him bent. But the cart. The cart was something else. He could not afford to transport 4 children to school every day. The school was far, the road was long, and his children were not missing a single day. He had decided that before the dust from Grace's departure had even settled. So he built a wooden cart from scraps in his workshop. Solid enough to carry 2 children at a time. He would load Abina and Amma first, pull them to school, run back home, and he ran. This exhausted man who worked until midnight every night, he actually ran, and load Kwame and Yo for the second trip. People lined the road to watch. Some laughed with their whole chests. Some filmed with their phones and showed the videos at parties. Some called out things that a decent person would be ashamed to repeat. One morning a woman in an expensive car stopped beside him, looked at the cart, looked at him, and said with the comfortable cruelty of someone who has never had to pull anything in their life, "Is this how you transport your children? Like bags of cement? No wonder your wife left. Who wants to live with this kind of embarrassment?" Kofi stopped. He looked at the woman for a moment. Then he looked at his children in the cart, Abina's eyes bright with unshed tears, Amma's little jaw set in an expression that was already beginning to look like fury being refined into something sharper and more dangerous. He turned back to the road. He picked up the rope. He kept pulling. He never responded to a single one of them. Not one. Because he had decided, in some deep wordless place, that the best answer he could give the world was not a speech. It was arrival. And he was not there yet. But he was going to get there. That afternoon at school, while other children played, Kwame gathered his siblings under a tree at the edge of the yard. He was 14, lean and serious, with the expression of someone who had aged several years in the past few weeks. He looked at each of his siblings in turn. "I need to say something," he said. "And I need you all to really hear me." Abina sat straight. Yo's jaw was tight. Amma looked at her brother with eyes that were still red at the edges. "People are going to keep laughing at Papa. We cannot stop that. What we can do is make sure that one day, they have nothing left to say. We are going to study harder than anyone in this school. We are going to become something so undeniable that the world will have to sit down and be quiet." He paused. "And we are going to make sure Papa never has to pull that cart again." Abina nodded. Yo was quiet, but his eyes said everything. And Amma, 12-year-old Amma, with the scabbing palms and the memory of gravel and a car that never slowed down, said in a voice that was steadier than it had any right to be, "I don't just want to buy Papa a car. I want to build him a house so big that everyone who laughed will have to drive past it every day and remember what they said." Nobody laughed at that. Because it did not sound like a child's wish. It sounded like a plan. Now here is the part of the story that most people would skip over in a hurry to get to the success. But these years, the years between that promise under the tree and the day everything changed, these years are the whole story. Because success built on nothing is just luck. But success built on years of choosing to stand up every morning when you have every reason to stay down, that is something else entirely. That is the kind of success that means something. Kofi learned things that year that no man should have to learn the way he learned them. He learned to cook or burn the rice so many times that you started timing him from the doorway with a spoon as a joke, and eventually it stopped being a joke because the rice stopped burning. He learned to plait hair with hands that had been built for iron and fire, pulling too tight, making crooked lines, while Abina sat patiently and said, "It's fine, Papa, you're getting better," even when it was not fine and he was not getting better yet. He learned to mend uniforms, to help with homework when he was so tired his eyes were crossing, to hold a crying child at midnight and say words that he was not sure he believed but said anyway because his children needed to believe them. There was a particular Tuesday he would never forget. He had 300 naira left. School fees were due in 2 days. There was nothing in the kitchen except half a bag of curry and some groundnuts. He sat at the table after the children were asleep and put his face in his hands and stayed like that for a long time. Not crying. Just sitting with the reality of what his life had become. Then he heard a sound and looked up, and Amma was standing in the doorway in her nightclothes, watching him. She walked to him without a word, climbed into his lap, this 12-year-old who was almost too big for it, and put her head against his chest. They sat like that in the dark kitchen for several minutes, saying nothing. Then she said quietly, "Papa, I am going to be a lawyer. And when I am, nobody will ever make you sit alone like this again." He held her tighter. He could not speak. The next morning he got up before dawn, went to his workshop, took on a small repair job he had been putting off, finished it by 8, collected the payment, and handled the school fees. He did not know then that what his daughter had said in that dark kitchen was not a child's comfort. It was a declaration. Those children were extraordinary in the way that children raised by struggle and love tend to be. They did not need to be pushed to study, they drove themselves with the particular ferocity of people who understood that education was not optional, that it was the only exit available to them and they were not going to miss it. Kwame would be at his books by 5 in the morning, the kerosene lamp throwing gold light across his pages while the rest of the house slept. Abina asked her teachers questions that made them pause and think before answering. Yo, whose gift was people, ran a small tuck shop at school during break time and gave half the profit to his father without being asked. And Amma argued with her teachers when she thought they were wrong, researched the correct answer, and came back the next day with evidence. Her teachers complained about her and praised her in the same breath. Their school reports were extraordinary. But the teachers who paid attention saw more than grades. They saw children who had decided something and were executing that decision with a discipline that most adults never find. One teacher said it plainly to a colleague one afternoon, "Those four are going somewhere. Whatever is happening in that house, whatever that man is doing to raise them, it is working." What that man was doing was simple and total. He was showing up. Every single day, in every way available to him, he was showing up. That was all. That was everything. Then came the day the government posted the announcement. A new civic center was being built, a landmark project that would stand for generations. Extensive ironwork was required throughout, grand entrance gates, interior railings, decorative structural supports, metalwork for the main hall and administrative wings. Local craftsmen were invited to submit bids. The contract was the largest Kofi had ever seen. It was so far beyond anything he had ever attempted that his first instinct was to fold the announcement and put it away. He unfolded it 3 times that evening. Each time he put it away. Each time something made him pick it up again. It was 16-year-old Kwame who found him at the kitchen table late that night, staring at the paper. Kwame read it. Then he looked at his father. "Papa. You can do this." "Kwame, this is bigger than." "You can do this," Kwame said again. Quietly. Without flinching. "Your work is the best in this town. Everyone knows it. Submit the bid." Kofi looked at his son, this serious, watchful boy who had become something he had not fully noticed until this moment, and nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. "We will try." They spent 3 sleepless nights preparing the proposal. Kwame typed the documents at a business center down the road, paying for the printing with money he had saved from washing cars after school. He sat beside his father night after night, checking numbers, organizing photographs of Kofi's best work, helping him find words for things that Kofi knew in his hands but struggled to put on paper. By the 3rd night Kofi's hands were shaking from exhaustion and Kwame made him a cup of tea and sat across from him and said nothing for a while. Then he said, "Papa. Tell me what you would say to them if you could just speak. No paper, no proposal. Just you, talking." Kofi thought about it. "I would tell them that I do not know how to make anything halfway. That every piece I have ever made, I made as if it was going to stand there long after I am gone and either prove that I was a man worth something or prove that I was not. And I have never been willing to let it prove the second thing." Kwame looked at him for a moment. "Say exactly that." The day of the bid presentation, Kofi put on his best shirt, clean, pressed with careful hands, faded at the collar, fraying at the cuffs. He walked into a room full of contractors who wore tailored suits and brought printed folders and had the comfortable posture of men who had stood in rooms like this many times before. He sat in his faded shirt with his few type pages and his photographs and he waited. When his turn came, he did not stand the way the other men stood, with the practiced ease of those who expect to be believed. He stood the way a man stands when he is telling the absolute truth and knows it and is simply waiting for the room to catch up. "I am a blacksmith," he said. "I do not have a large company or many workers or a presentation that fills a folder. What I have made alone, with these hands, in a small workshop at the edge of town. I have been poor. I have raised 4 children alone. I have pulled them to school in a wooden cart while people stood on the side of the road and laughed." He paused. Not for effect. Just because the next part mattered and he wanted it to land correctly. "Every piece of ironwork I have ever made, I made as if it was going to stand there long after I am gone and either prove that I was a man worth something or prove that I was not. I have never been willing to let it prove the second thing. If you give me this contract, that is still what I will do. Because I do not know how to make anything halfway. It is not in me. He sat down. The room was very quiet. The next 3 days were the longest of Kofi's life. He went to work because he did not know how else to feel the waiting. He welded and shaped and hammered and tried not to think about the letter that had not come yet. The children were quieter than usual, they all knew. Nobody said much at dinner. Amma kept watching him from across the table with those serious eyes, and every time he caught her looking she would give him a small nod, the way you nod at someone when you want them to know you are still with them. On the second night he could not sleep. He lay in the dark and ran through every possible version of what came next. If he did not get it, he would find another way. He would always find another way. He was not afraid of another way. But he was so tired. He was so deeply, thoroughly tired of finding other ways. He wanted, just this once, for the thing he reached for to actually be there when his hand arrived. On the morning of the third day, the letter came. He stood at the door holding it for a full minute before he opened it. His hands were steady, he made them steady. Kwame was beside him. Abina, Yo, and Amma were gathered at the kitchen doorway watching. The house was completely silent. He read the first line. He stopped. He read it again. His voice, when it came, was barely a sound at all. I got it. Then again, louder, cracking open with something that had been compressed for years, tears and laughter arriving at the same time in a way that only happens when relief is so profound it overwhelms all the separate systems trying to express it. I got the contract. The house exploded. Kwame seized his father and held on. Abina was weeping before she had fully processed the words. Yo lifted Amma off the ground and spun her around. All 4 children were laughing and crying at the same time, and Kofi stood in the middle of all of it and wept without any attempt to hide it because there was no one left to be strong for in this moment. This moment was just for them. That night they had their first real feast in years. Chicken. Rice. Cold drinks. They sat around the table and talked over each other and laughed until their stomachs hurt, and for the first time in a very long time the house felt like it had before, full, loud, alive with something that was not just survival but actual joy. The kind that you earn and therefore actually feel. Papa, Amma said, when the evening had gone quiet and soft. Does this mean no more cards? Kofi looked at his daughter, this fierce, bright, unbreakable child, with her father's eyes and a will that had been tested early and had not broken, and felt something release in his chest that had been held tight for so long he had forgotten what it felt like without it. No more cards, he said. I promise. The contract was the door. What Kofi did with it was run through it at full speed and never stop running. The work he produced for the Civic Center was so precise, so durable, so visibly made with complete dedication that the government officials were calling him before the project was even finished. Another contract came. Then another. Word moved through the region the way truth always eventually does, quietly but absolutely. If you want iron work that will outlast you, find Kofi. That man makes things like his soul is in every weld. It was. He hired workers. Young men from the town who needed work found in Kofi a man who remembered what it felt like to need it. He upgraded his workshop, bought better equipment, and expanded into contracts across the region. He bought a car, a used Toyota, clean and reliable, and on the first morning he drove his children to school. Every neighbor who had ever stood on that road and laughed came out to watch in silence. The 4 children sitting in the back seat, all of them squeezed together, all of them crying and laughing at the same time, Amma with her face pressed to the window watching the road they used to travel by cart. That image was worth every single morning he had pulled that rope. The years that followed were the years of arrival. Kwame studied engineering and graduated at the top of his class, earning a scholarship abroad that took him further than that small town could have imagined. Abina studied medicine with the same quiet precision she had brought to everything since childhood, becoming a doctor recruited by one of the most respected hospitals in the country. Yo, whose genius was always for people and possibility, built a construction supply company that grew faster than anyone expected, perhaps because he had watched his father build something from nothing and had understood in his bones that it was actually possible. And Alma studied law with the ferocity of someone who had been given her motivation very early and had never once let go of it. She became the kind of attorney that opposing counsel did not want to face. Sharp, meticulous, relentless. The kind of woman who walked into a courtroom and made the room rearrange itself around her presence. None of them forgot. Not even for a day. When Alma was 24, she called her siblings on a video call. Four faces on the screen, from different cities, different stages of lives that had turned out beyond anything their younger selves had dared to imagine. "You all remember what we promised under that tree," she said. It was not a question. They pooled their resources without a single argument. Kwame from abroad. Abina from her hospital salary. Yo from his business accounts. Alma from her law practice. And they built their father a house. Not a monument designed to impress the people who had left. Something warmer and more deliberate than that. A house that said, simply and permanently, this man deserved better all along, and now he has it. 6 bedrooms, one for each child to come home to, and the main bedroom for Kofi, with a window looking out onto a garden where he could simply sit and breathe without needing to be anywhere or do anything. A study filled with books. A kitchen where no one would ever go hungry. A garage with 2 good cars. Above the front door, a handcrafted iron plaque, made by one of Kofi's own former apprentices, using skills Kofi himself had taught him, that read, "Built by 4 children who never forgot what their father carried for them." And on the compound wall, mounted in a glass frame, the old wooden cart. Preserve. Deliberate. Permanent. With a small inscription beneath it. "This is where we came from. This is why we never stopped." Now let us talk about Grace. Because her story did not pause while Kofi's was being written. The first 3 years after she left were everything she had told herself they would be. Chief Mensa set her up in a city apartment, clean, modern, with a view that made her old life look like a photograph from someone else's past. He took her to restaurants where the menus had no prices. He bought her jewelry and clothes and took her to Accra and Dubai, and she posted photographs online and received comments that felt, in the moment, like validation. She did not think about Kofi. She told herself she did not think about the children, though sometimes, in the particular silence of 3 in the morning when Chief Mensa was asleep and she was lying awake staring at a ceiling that cost more than Kofi's entire workshop, something would move in her chest that she did not have a name for and did not want to examine. She did not examine it. She turned over and went back to sleep. And Serwa was always there, a call, a visit, a lunch, always with a new story about a new acquisition, always making Grace feel that what she had was exactly right and that going back would be a kind of death. "You are finally leaving," Serwa would say. "This is who you were supposed to be all along." And Grace would nod and smile and not say the thing she could not say, which was that she was not entirely sure she recognized the woman she was becoming. Then Chief Mensa's wife found out. The chaos was total and it was swift. His wife came from a family with enough money and enough connections to make his life genuinely difficult, and she used every instrument available to her with the focused precision of a woman who has been wronged and has decided to make that felt. Parties where Grace appeared were suddenly parties where Grace was not welcome. Mutual friends who had smiled at her in restaurants began to look through her at the same events. Chief Mensa, who had always been a man who valued peace above most things, did the calculation that such men always do. He called Grace one evening. His voice was already decided. Already far away. This is not working. My wife is making my life impossible. I need my home back. A pause. The apartment lease ends this month. I am not renewing it. Keep the car, the papers are in your name. But do not contact me again. He hung up. Grace sat holding the phone in the apartment that was no longer hers, in the city that had never really been hers, and the silence that fell around her was different from any silence she had ever sat in before. It had weight. It had consequences. It was the silence of a woman who had burned her own house down to stay warm and was only now feeling the cold. She called Surwa. The phone rang several times. Then, Grace, I am in a meeting. What is it? The warmth was different. Thinner. Chief Mensa and yes, I heard. These things happen. You will find someone else. Call me next week. She hung up. Grace stared at her phone. She tried. She tried hard, the way a woman tries when she still believes she has cards left to play. There were other men, friends of the chief, contacts from parties, men she had met through Surwa's network. She got dressed and went out and smiled and was charming and told herself this was temporary, that she was between chapters, that the next chapter was coming. But she was 38 now, and the world she was navigating ran on a particular economy of youth, and the men with Chief Mensa's resources were making different calculations than they had 3 years ago. The calls came less. The invitations dried up. The men who did show interest were men with smaller resources and larger problems, and she found herself on a slide she could not stop. Within a year she had sold the car to cover rent on a smaller apartment. Within 2 years she was selling the jewelry, piece by piece, each sale a small private funeral. The designer bags went. The clothes went. Everything that had arrived as a symbol of arrival became a resource to be liquidated, and the liquidating itself was its own particular humiliation. The pawnbroker who looked at her gold without looking at her face, the second-hand shop that offered a quarter of what she had paid, the quiet mathematics of a life contracting. She moved back to a small town. Rented a single room with a window that looked out onto a rubbish heap. Washes other people's clothes for money. Ate simply. Slept in the dark. There was a night, one specific night, that she would carry for the rest of her life. She had found Abina's name in an old newspaper, in a small feature about promising young medical students. She sat with that newspaper for a long time. She picked up her phone. She put in the number she had not used in years, Kofi's number, the one she still knew by heart the way you know things that were once your whole life. She got as far as the last digit. She sat with her thumb hovering over it for 10 minutes. Then she put the phone face down on the bed and lay down and stared at the ceiling and told herself that they were better off. That calling would only hurt them. That she had no right. That it was too late. She told herself all of these things. Some of them were even true. The years accumulated. Shame is a strange companion, it does not decrease with time the way pain sometimes does. It grows more specific. More detailed. It knows your name and it knows exactly which memories to bring to you at 3 in the morning, and it is very patient. Grace learned to live with it the way you learn to live with a bad knee, always there, always making itself known, adjusting the way you move through every room. Then one morning she went to buy bread and saw the newspaper on the vendor's stand and stopped. The photograph was large, all 4 children standing with their father in front of a beautiful house, 4 successful adults and one man who looked older but profoundly, quietly at peace. They were all smiling, the specific smile of people who have earned exactly where they are standing. The headline read, "From Cart to Castle, the Blacksmith Who Never Gave Up." Grace stood at the vendor's stand and read the entire article where she stood. She did not move for a long time. The vendor watched her curiously. She was not crying. She was past the stage where it came quickly. She was in the deeper stage, the stage where the feeling is so large and so comprehensive that the body does not know where to begin with it. She bought the newspaper. She took it back to her room and sat on the edge of her bed and read it again. Every word. She read about the cart. She read about the mornings he ran back home to make the second trip. She read about the mockery, about the children's vow under the tree, about the contract, about Kwami's scholarship and Abina's hospital and Yo's company and Ama, her baby, the one who had run barefoot after her car, now the most feared attorney in the region. She folded the paper in her lap. She looked at the window with the rubbish heap beyond it. She looked back at the photograph of the family she had driven away from. "I need to see them," she whispered. Not because she expected forgiveness. She was past expecting things. Simply because she needed to look at what she had done with her own eyes, in full, without the protective distance of newspaper print. Simply because she owed them that witness, even if they owed her nothing in return. She used the last of her money to board a bus. She almost turned back at the gate. The house was not what she had expected. She had expected something designed to impress, the architectural equivalent of a declaration. What she found instead was something worse and better than that. The house was warm. It was dignified. It looked like a place where people actually lived and were actually glad to live there. The iron plaque above the door caught the afternoon light. She read it. She read it again. She stood at the gate for a long time with her hands at her sides, wearing her faded clothes, her bare wrists where the gold used to be, her face carrying 10 years of consequences. She walked to the gate. The security guard looked at her with the mild, professional attention of someone whose job is to assess. "Can I help you?" Grace straightened her back. "I am their mother," she said. Something shifted in the guard's face. He knew the story. Everyone who worked in that house knew it. Kofi had never hidden it, had told it plainly and without embellishment as a thing that had happened and been survived. The guard looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Wait here," and went inside. Inside the house, the family was at Sunday lunch. All 4 children home. This was the one non-negotiable constant Kofi had established years ago, the monthly gathering around the same table that had kept them tethered to each other across cities and countries and different versions of themselves. Kwame was telling a story about something that had happened at work abroad, and Yo was laughing and Abina was rolling her eyes affectionately and Ama was eating with the focused attention she brought to everything. Kofi sat at the head of the table looking at his 4 children with the expression of a man who is aware, in real time, that he is looking at the greatest thing he ever made. Then the guard came in and said his piece. The table went silent in the way that a table goes silent when something arrives that everyone has thought about privately but never said out loud. Kwame said, without heat, without drama, with the flat certainty of someone who has had his answer ready for years, "Send her away." Abina said quietly, "No. Let her in. Let her see this table. Let her see what she missed." Yo said nothing. His jaw was tight. His eyes were somewhere private. Ama set down her fork. She looked at her father. Kofi was quiet for a moment that seemed to last longer than a moment. Then he said, "Let her in. We will hear what she has to say." Grace walked the path from the gate slowly. She passed the cars in the garage. She passed the garden where the afternoon light was doing something beautiful that she did not feel she had the right to appreciate. She passed the compound wall where the cart hung in its glass frame, and she stopped there for a moment and looked at it, the rough wooden thing, the rope handle worn smooth, the wheels, this ordinary object that had carried her children to school in the absence of everything she was supposed to provide, and something in her face changed in a way she had not planned and could not control. She walked into the house and was brought to the dining room doorway, and there they were. Kofi. Older. Grayer at the temples. But steady in a way that made her understand that whatever had tried to undo him had failed completely. And her children. Kwame, 30, with his father's careful eyes. Abina, 28, looking at her with the expression of someone who has thought about this moment and prepared for it. Yaw, 26, jaw set, the laughter that had always been his most natural expression entirely absent. And Amma, 24 years old, sitting straight back at that table, looking at her mother with a gaze so clear and so steady that Grace felt it like a physical thing. This was the child who had run barefoot after her car. This was the child whose palms had bled on that gravel road. This was the child who had sat in a dark kitchen and climbed into her father's lap and told him she was going to be a lawyer. Grace looked at her daughter and understood, in the comprehensive way that you understand things when it is already too late to do anything with the understanding, exactly what she had left behind. Her legs went. She went down on her knees in the doorway. She did not plan it. It was simply the only posture available to her at that moment. "I am sorry," she said. Her voice was not what she wanted it to be. It was small and stripped of everything that used to be in it. "I am so sorry. I was foolish. I was greedy. I was so sure that I knew what I needed, and I destroyed the only real thing I had been trying to get. Please forgive me. Please." Nobody spoke. She moved forward on her knees, because the doorway felt too far from them. "Kofi. I know I have no right to ask you for anything. I know what I did to you. I know what I did to them. I know, and I am sorry, and I know that sorry is not enough, but it is all I have." She turned to the children. "My babies. Look at what you have become. All of you. I am so..." "Stop." Kwame's voice was quiet and absolute. "You do not get to be proud of us. You were not there. You had no part in this. Everything in this room exists because of Papa, because he got up every morning when he had every reason to stop, because he pulled that cart through mockery we had to sit in and feel on our skin, because he skipped meals and wore the same shirts for years and never once let us feel that we were not worth everything he had. You left. He stayed. We are his. Not yours." Abina said, "Do you know what it did to us? Do you know how many nights you cried and told me he was fine? Do you know that Kwame used to wake up at 2 in the morning and go sit in the yard because he could not sleep and he did not want us to see him struggling?" Yo said nothing. He was looking at the table. Then Amma spoke. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "I was 6 years old," she said. "I ran after your car until my knees hit the ground. My palms were bleeding and I was screaming your name, and I genuinely believed, the way 6-year-olds believe things, that if I just screamed loud enough you would stop. That you would hear me. That you would come back." She paused. "You did not stop. You did not slow down. You did not look back." Another pause. "I am 24 years old and I became a lawyer because I grew up understanding that some people live and feel nothing, and I decided that would never happen to the people I love without consequences. I am very good at my job." Grace was weeping. She was past language. "Please," she managed. "I have nothing. I have nowhere to go. Please let me be part of this family again. Just let me try." Kofi set down his fork. He folded his hands on the table. He looked at Grace, at this woman he had loved with everything available to him, at the woman he had knelt in the dust for, at the woman he had kept forgiving in the privacy of his own heart for years simply because he could not afford the alternative, and he spoke with the quiet finality of a verdict that has been a long time forming. Grace, I forgave you a long time ago. Not because what you did was acceptable. Because I was carrying 4 children and I could not carry bitterness as well. I forgave you the way you put down a heavy thing when your arms are full, not because the thing was light, but because you have to. He paused. But forgiveness is not reconciliation. You are not walking back into this family. I became their mother and their father. I braided their hair with hands that were not made for it. I sat alone at every school event where other parents came in pairs. I held them through fevers and nightmares and the particular grief of children who cannot understand why their mother did not love them enough to stay. You were not there for any of it. You have no place here. Grace looked at him. Then to her children. Then at the table set for 5 people who had made a family without her and had done it so completely and so well that her arrival here was not a homecoming. It was an intrusion. Amma spoke again, and her voice now had the measured, precise quality of someone delivering terms. We will not put you on the street. Papa did not raise us to do that to anyone, and we will not do it to you. We will pay for a modest apartment in another town and send you money for your basic needs every month. She looked at her mother with eyes that were clear and not unkind and absolutely closed. But you will never live in this house. You will never sit at this table. We are offering you this because of who Papa raised us to be. Not because of anything you are to us. Take it, Kofi said quietly. Or leave. But there is nothing else here. Grace looked around the room one final time. At the table laid for 5. At the faces of the children she had driven away from when they were small enough to run after her car. At the man she had called poverty-stricken and left kneeling in the dust. None of them were kneeling now. I accept, she said. She left the way she had arrived, quietly, with nothing. The gate closed behind her with a sound that was not dramatic, just final. Inside, after a long, full silence, he picked up his fork. Abina reached across and touched Kwame's hand briefly. Kofi looked around the table at his 4 children and something moved across his face that was not quite a smile and not quite tears but somewhere between them, the expression of a man who has arrived somewhere real after a journey that almost broke him, looking at the proof that it was worth it. Amma caught his eye across the table. She gave him the small nod, the same one she had been giving him since she was 12 years old in a dark kitchen. The one that meant I am still here. The one that meant we made it. Outside in the compound, the afternoon light touched the cart in its glass frame on the wall. The inscription beneath it was not visible from the dining room window. But they all knew what it said. They always would. She had chased gold and returned with dust. He had worked with iron every single day of his life, through mockery and hunger and abandonment and years that would have ended a smaller man, and he had built something that would outlast all of it. Not the house. Not the contracts or the cars or the plaque above the door. His children. Their love. The family that had been tested at its root and had not broken. The cart stayed on the wall. It always would. Because some things are too important to put away. Some reminders are not about the past. They are about who you decided to become when the past was trying to destroy you. And the people who were pulled in that cart, who felt the shame of it, who made their vow under a tree at school, who kept that promise through every year that tried to take it from them, those people knew something that most people spend their whole lives trying to find. That the struggle was never the end of the story. It was just the beginning of the real one. If this story moved something in you, you are exactly the kind of person this channel was made for. Hit the like button if Kofi's story reminded you that quiet, faithful people finish, or they always finish. Subscribe because there are more stories waiting here that will stay with you long after you stop watching. And drop in the comments the moment that hits you hardest, because this community reads every single one, and your words matter more than you know. We will see you in the next one. And trust me, you do not want to miss it.